Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, September 16th, 2015, middle of the day, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday and another crazy weekend. And we have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room as usual, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, the big news today, aside from the GOP debate tonight, which we'll get into a little bit later in the show, the situation in Syria seems to be escalating rapidly, goaded primarily by Western propaganda. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, and nobody's buying any of this. Everybody understands it's the U.S. support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda that has led to the devastation of Syria. It's the U.S. bombing of Syrian infrastructure under the excuse that they're attacking ISIS, but always seem to miss, that has caused this problem. There's a disaster going on in Syria wrought by the United States of America because they want Assad gone and somebody else favorable to the United States put in. Now, they're trying to make a really big deal over the fact that Putin has sent tanks to Syria. And it's kind of interesting to see the Western media describe it as the largest deployment of tanks outside, deployment of outside Russian forces since the collapse of the Soviet Union, which makes it sound really major until you realize they're talking about 6 tanks. Just 6. And even though they're good tanks, it's just 6 of them. And the Western media is acting like Russia's tanks are rolling down the streets of Washington, D.C. Now, Kerry is out there saying that Russia is trying to broach the subject of military talks on Syria to coordinate their militaries. Right now, they are not talking to each other. And that's a recipe for disaster. Now, Kerry is pushing the official U.S. position, saying that Russia's support for Assad will only make the matter worse and undermine the shared goal of fighting extremism. In other words, if Russia comes in to help get rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's only going to make ISIS and Al-Qaeda stronger. That's what Kerry is trying to sell everybody. We're writing to George Orwell logic here. I mean, the position of the United States of America is, once Assad goes, we just know for certain that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are just going to pack up and leave Syria, which the U.S. is in a unique position to be able to guarantee, even though they don't want you to know about it. Now, John McCain is out there flapping his lips again, blaming Obama for the Russian military buildup in Syria. How could you let this happen? Well, first of all, John McCain needs to remember something very fundamental. Syria's legitimate government has asked Russia to help them against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Syria's legitimate government has not asked the United States to come in and bomb their country to rubble. And that is all you need to keep in mind to understand who's the bad guy in all of this mess. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Slim in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just calling you about the Middle East and your current topic that you're going on.
Yes.
I was, doing my thing on Facebook and, doing my thing trying to preach the gospel of the banksters and their cartels, and talking about how Syria is just a target because they don't have a central bank currently in their country, and they're one of few countries in the world that are central bank, not under central bank control.
Under private central bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I said that, and just by those words, I was labeled as a conspiracy theorist.
Well, right now, all of these financial interests and government are just spending huge amounts of money hiring public relations firms to load up the Internet with operatives.
No, these are my friends.
These are your friends? Oh, okay. Even online shills have friends. Let's be honest about that. Let me share a story with you. When I was in college, whoa, he dropped the line. Okay, or we had a line cut off. When I was in college many years ago, I was invited to go along to this anti-war demonstration that was supposed to be in front of the Disneyland theme park. I was invited by the person who, at that time, I thought was my best friend in the world. And we got there. The leaders of the protest took everybody inside, caused a riot. Was called the day the hippies took over Disneyland, was all over the media. National Guard came out, and in a single stroke, the credibility of the anti-Vietnam War movement was destroyed. And the whole thing set back by a couple of years. And it was an FBI operation that came out during the COINTELPRO hearings in the 1970s. And my best friend at the time, after it was all over, let me know he was an undercover FBI informant, and he tried to recruit me, which was the last day I ever spoke to the little bastard. So just because somebody is your friend does not rule out the possibility that they are working clandestinely for corporations or public relations firms. As I was starting to tell him, there's a name for it. It's called grassroots lobbying. Now, when you're lobbying a politician, you have to wear an ID tag that says, I am a lobbyist from this company. But lobbyists who lobby ordinary citizens are not under that restriction. And they understand they're more effective if they don't reveal they're paid lobbyists. And, I mean, disinformation and lying, which is what public relations is really all about, that's practically the only growth industry we've got left in this country. But they're trying to go on out there and say, anybody who thinks private central banks are bad is a conspiracy theorist. Everybody who thinks that, piling up debt leads to war, you're just being a wild-eyed, kook, tinfoil hat-wearing wacko. Now then, getting on back to Syria, interesting little story out of an Investment Watch blog, talking about how the top Islamic State military commander was trained by the United States. Long chain of events where this guy was recruited and trained and supported by the United States, and he's been sent all over to these various countries to help set up these little proxy destabilizations, and now he's down there in Syria. And it leads to the next question from antiwar.com. Is the U.S. setting up a proxy war against Russia in Syria? And it may be happening, because Russia's foreign ministry last week was saying that their understanding is the U.S. is hoping to turn Syria into a new Afghanistan for Russia, at the risk of Syria becoming a new Vietnam for the United States of America. Because Afghanistan may have worked against the former Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is now gone. And you've got the new Russian republics, which have a lot of international support for what they are doing. It's a very, very different dynamic on the ground. And the U.S. is already stuck in all these other quagmires: Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya. Now, Assad is out there joining the chorus of voices around the world, saying that the reason for this refugee crisis is because the U.S. is supporting terrorists in Syria, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the resulting conflict is what's driving people out of the countries. And we know that Assad is speaking the truth. That's the big stink, the big secret that was being hidden over at that consulate in Benghazi. That was the hub to take weapons left over from the execution of Gaddafi and the reconquest of Libya, which is still in a mess, and send them over to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria to use against Assad. And you're not supposed to know that, because you're still being told ISIS and Al-Qaeda are the bad guys. We must hate them. You must give us your money and the lives of your children to fight them. And then you find out the U.S. government is spending your tax money to give them guns. Most Americans are probably going to be a little puzzled about that one. So they don't want to trouble your childish little mind with these little complications. Just remember, we're good, they're bad, that's all you need to know. Meanwhile, Assad is correct. It's the U.S. intrusion into Syria that has caused the refugee crisis. It's not the fault of Putin. It's not the fault of human-caused global warming. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about events in Syria, and Secretary of State John Kerry is talking to his counterparts in the Russian government and trying to sell them on this very convoluted Orwellian logic that if Russia comes in and helps Syria's President Assad against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that will only make matters worse. Well, from the point of the United States that is using ISIS and Al-Qaeda to get rid of Assad, that's certainly accurate enough. But they're trying to phrase it in a way to somehow convince Russia that Russia should just butt out and let the U.S. do what they want to do. And the U.S. has set as policy that Assad must go as the necessary first step and allow a political settlement, meaning the imposition of a U.S. puppet ruler. That's what they're back to again. And you need to remember, Syria's legitimate government has asked Russia to come in and help them against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The legitimate government of Syria has not asked the United States to come in and bomb the place to rubble. So you can see how over the top and arrogant the U.S. position happens to be right now. Now we're looking at this article over in RINF.com, and it's laying out what's going on. The cause of Syria's bloodshed is finally confirmed. And here's where it gets interesting. Obama and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, all the U.S. proxies, they are losing in Syria. And a Western diplomat has gone public saying that back in 2012, before we started making stink face with Russia, Russia was agreeable to negotiating Assad stepping down in Syria. Washington, D.C. turned down the Russian offer of cooperation in order to guarantee that Washington, D.C. all by itself would choose Syria's next government. That's the duplicity going on over there. All right, we got a couple of phone calls here. We're going to start with Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Glenn, are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing Glenn, so I'm going to put you on hold, and I'll come back to you in a few minutes. It looks like we're having some technical issues. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is getting ready to have a confab with Vladimir Putin, in which he's going to say that any military aid to Syria threatens Israel, because we all know Bashar al-Assad has no problems to deal with in his own country, and if he gets a couple of tanks, the first thing he's going to do is invade Israel. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, we know Israel is supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. There have been photos and videos of ISIS and Al-Qaeda being supplied by the IDF at the border. Israel is on board this mission to get rid of Assad in collaboration with the United States of America. And Netanyahu's trying to find some way to stop Putin from supporting Syria. Putin's not going to back down on this. Syria has asked him to be there. And Putin understands that if he goes into Syria and he actually kicks ISIS and Al-Qaeda out, then the U.S. and Israel lose their excuse to wage war against Syria. It's a brilliant, brilliant chess move. And I'm sure Netanyahu's going to be screaming at Putin, "You're a Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens," which is what they say all the time. All right, we're going to go back and try and see if we can get Glenn in Pennsylvania. Glenn, are you on the line now?
Yes, I was on the line then, too.
Oh, well, I couldn't hear you. Something went wrong. The little bits got lost somewhere in the transmission. What's on your mind?
Alrighty. In the 1999 James Bond movie, The World Is Not Enough, with Pierce Brosnan and Robbie Coltrane, who played Valentin Zukovsky.
Yes. There's
a scene in which Valentin Zukovsky takes Pierce Brosnan into their what used to be KGB headquarters, and now it's the new version. And he says, "Welcome to the new what is it, FSB headquarters or something." Yeah. And he's like, new name, same friendly service.
Yes.
And this is not necessarily my stance, but I mean, a lot of people believe, that the Soviet Union never really, only changed its hat, never really changed that much. And it's part of this overture thing of peace where they're going to lower the boom later on after, like Khrushchev talked about, there being great overtures of peace, and then, boom, they'll betray the West.
Well, that's part of a scam that all of the military in every single country play on their people. to always being put out there, oh, we're at risk, we're at threat, these other people are coming to get us, we need more of your money to build more of these really fancy toys and weapons and more ribbons and medals and gold things for our uniforms and everything. And the Russian military played it against the Soviet citizens, our military plays it against us. Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex. It is a common feature in every single country with a significant military. They're always out there propagandizing imminent threat, imminent danger in order to get more money.
Are you familiar with Joel Skousen? And again, I'm not advocating this stance. I'm just aware of it. Joel Skousen's pretty well known for doing the rounds on the Patriot radio circuit, and he has a stance that says, eventually, like, ultimately Russia and China are out to pick a fight with the West, and he even believes that it's the Russians who were behind the Maidan revolution in Ukraine. But people are very serious about these things. I'm not saying they're right, but there's always a cacophony of contradictions out there.
Well, this guy sounds like there used to be this guy making the rounds on the media, Gerald, I forget his last name, but he made a complete career out of reinforcing the official story about the JFK assassination or anything else and constantly attacking any alternative viewpoints, and he was very well paid to do that. At this point... No, not Snelende. It's another Gerald. But I think looking at the recent history of U.S. aggressions in other countries versus the Russian Republic's history of trying to calm things down, whether it's in Syria or Ukraine, I think it is very, very obvious who the warmongers and aggressors are going into this third world war. Russia just wants to do business and live their lives and have peace. Same thing with China. But the U.S. wants to force the world back to the Bretton Woods deal, from which the U.S. financial system profited handsomely for little more than the cost of ink and paper. And that's what these wars are really all about. The United States has allowed its manufacturing to decline. Nobody wants our agricultural produce because of GMO. If the world drops using the U.S. dollar internationally, the U.S. economy is going to collapse because it's got nothing else to prop it up. And that is why they're trying to reinforce global dollar hegemony at the point of a bayonet.
Right, and so, like, in keeping with what you always say about Let's You and Him Fight, and what the James Bond movies say about Spectre and Smersh, what if the manipulators at the top, pitting East against, that this is all an orchestrated punch and Judy show?
Glenn, can I share something with you from my 30-plus years working in the Hollywood film industry? It was only a movie.
No,
thank you.
I know that.
We got to take a commercial break here. We got to let you go, and thank you very much. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going to go ahead and take another phone call here. Mark in Texas. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
Mike, two things. One, I saw an interview today on RT this morning before I left the house, and it was great. They were interviewing Assad in Syria, and I'm beginning to believe Assad is one of the great leaders I believe this for a while, but now I really believe in the world. He made it very clear that the United States and Western Europe are behind ISIS, that they've created the terrorists. And I think Russia is going to stand behind him 100%. And I'm very happy about Putin that he's doing that. At the same time, last night, I don't usually watch this clown, but I just happened to watch because he had an interview with Donald Trump. And after that, he was talking about, O'Reilly started talking about Assad and Putin and why we're in a situation we're in now with the refugees. And of course, he blamed it on Assad, including gassing his own people. But anybody with any common sense knows now that gas was provided to the terrorists, well, they say the Syrian rebels, but they were really terrorists, by the CIA, who was smuggling weapons through from Libya through Turkey. And I'm sure they were smuggling a little poison gas with it too, and it was used as a false flag. I mean, what is wrong? I mean, is O'Reilly stupid, or is he just...
He's bought. He makes a huge amount of money getting up there and telling you what his owners and masters want you to be thinking. And it is nonsensical, some of the stuff they're putting out there. And it goes on back to what I've always said before. If you want to know you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And the story about Assad gassing his own people literally came down to Assad was gassing his own Alawite supporters, people on his side, with a banned chemical weapon right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. And the part of the story that's missing is, why would he do that? They're his own supporters. Why would he do it in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors? And of course, there's no motive there, and that's why we know the story was completely bogus. It was a frame-up job.
I didn't believe it from the day it happened. And the other thing about Assad is this. He pointed out that many of the people who've already left Syria have been able to still vote in Syrian elections and have voted overwhelmingly for Assad. And there's somebody by the name of Syrian Girl that comes on sometimes on YouTube, and she's wasn't even particularly a friend of Assad because her family had some problems with him. And she's also not a Shiite, what do you call a Sunni?
Yep. But
she's a good person. I mean, she's a Syrian first and a human being first, you know? And, she says again and again, the problem is not Assad. The problem is the West arming these terrorists and basically causing all the destruction of Syria. I just hope it's not too late. I hope that with Russia helping now that they can turn the tide. And I hope too that they unite with the Kurds, which they seem to be doing now. I saw something the other day again on RT where they looked like a Syrian commander was actually relieved a bunch of Kurds who were under pressure, who were kind of surrounded, and he relieved them. And it looks to me like there is hope there, but I just hope it's not too late, and I hope the destruction has been so bad to Syria that they can never even recover from it.
Well, they'll be decades recovering from it, if not half a century. Same thing with Libya, same thing with Yemen. And, have you noticed there's a very consistent pattern going on with the U.S. government in terms of who their friends are and who their enemies are? Rulers of countries like Qatar, who are basically looting their people to give to the money junkies, are our friends, and rulers who are trying to manage their country for the good of the country and its people are our enemies. It's rather black and white and very obvious that's what's going on. We're in a war between rulers who think their countries exist to be plundered versus rulers who think they're put into power to, manage the place and do a good job. I mean, Gaddafi had raised the standard of living in Libya. He'd created this massive waterworks project, just a feat of modern engineering that was greening up Libya. But, how dare you do that? Same thing with Hugo Chavez down in Venezuela. He was taking all the oil money from Venezuela's oil, and he was spending it on the people. And by golly, you don't do that. The people are there to make the money junkies richer, is the thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street and much of Europe.
Well, you don't believe, in other words, that Hugo Chavez really didn't cause pretty much the destruction of countries?
No, I don't believe that. I mean, remember, during one of these very harsh winters, which we were told by our government couldn't exist because of human-caused global warming, Hugo Chavez was offering to send fuel oil to the United States, to those parts of the country that had run out, and people were freezing in their homes, and Chavez was just going to ship up tankers full of fuel oil for them to heat their homes, and the U.S. said, no, go away. We'd rather have our people freeze to death than accept anything nice from you.
So in other words, he's not really a communist and all this stuff like they say. That's all they were saying about the guy.
Well, he may have been a socialist, and when you get right down to it, capitalism may actually be kind of a blurry illusion because the world ultimately breaks down between two political economic models. On the one side, you have socialism, which is that everybody is entitled to an equal share of, life's blessings. And then on the other side, you have fascism, where all the wealth is supposed to be owned by a very few people and everybody else lives their lives in perpetual debt servitude. And that's what these conflicts are all about. I get sick and tired of all these corporate media people talking about, there's a socialist communist revolution happening in this country. No, it isn't. We're sinking into fascism. And the irony is that Vladimir Lenin predicted when Western capitalism failed, because it was based on a debt currency and had to fail eventually, it would become fascistic merely to prolong its wealth and privilege, and that's exactly what has happened.
Well, do you think, talk about Lenin, do you think Lenin was really a murderous murderous type of guy like to make him out to be? Or do you think?
Well, I never met him, so I don't really know. But I'll tell you this: I'm in agreement with George Carlin. I don't believe anything the U.S. government says.
Okay. Well, it definitely does seem Stalin was a mass murderer.
Stalin, I will grant you, yeah, the office went to his head. And unfortunately, you'll see new countries created by very well-meaning individuals like our founding fathers. And as they step down and retire, opportunists come on in and say, all right, we got this great country and everybody's got money. How do I get it out of them? Like Alexander Hamilton, who was immediately trying to bring the young United States of America back into debt servitude to the European banking clans.
Alexander Hamilton? No, that I didn't know.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was the private central banker's inside man in the U.S. government. That was one of the issues that led to the duel with Aaron Burr. And that's why they still put him on the $10 bill, you know?
Oh, I thought he was supposed to be one of the good guys. I didn't know.
No, he wasn't. I mean, he did a lot of good, but there was no question he wanted to tangle up the young United States back into the existing debt servitude private central banking structure.
What about Mao Zedong? What do you think? Do you think he was as terrible as they make him out to be, or do you think?
I don't think anybody in history is as terrible as we've been told or as good as we've been told. I think everybody is a blend. And again, I'm not relying on anything I learned in the public school system or from TV, movies, and government statements to make any decisions about people. I haven't gone out to do a lot of research on Mao Zedong yet, but every time I go out and research somebody, I find out they're never the villain or the hero we've been told they are. The world is not as polarized as it is presented to us. What?
There's a lot of stuff on the History Channel lately about people like Stalin, Mao Zedong, and people like that.
Oh, they've been given their orders. Demonize Russia, demonize China. They're the bad guys. I mean, they're in a full court press here to get us all hot and bothered to fling our babies onto the Chinese and Russian bayonets. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much, Mark. We're going to let you go. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before I go back to the phones, I want to pick up a couple more stories here. The Pentagon is now confirming that they have opened a formal investigation in response to some 50 military intelligence officers coming forward to say their assessments of what's been going on in Syria, particularly in regard to ISIS, are being rewritten by higher-ups to suit political agendas. Maybe also to cover up the fact that ISIS is actually working for the United States of America. And, of course, we understand the government is always going to be overstating the success of military operations to the American public. But the real problem is if these reports were being used to decide policy within the administration, then they're making decisions on the basis of inaccurate information, and that is a recipe for absolute disaster. Now, Russia's envoy to the European Union is saying that the West and Russia are involved in an active information war. No surprise there. And I think the West is going to lose it. And the reason they're going to lose it, it comes from another article, Russia Insider, why BBC's new Russian language service is not going to be keeping Putin up at night. It isn't a matter of exposure and broadcast reach. It's a matter of credibility. And at this point in history, the Western media has destroyed its credibility. The Western governments have destroyed their credibility, particularly with that whopper about Saddam's nuclear weapons. And that does not stand alone. Everybody is going back. Everybody is relearning the fact how many times we've been lied into wars. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Lusitania not carrying weapons, Pearl Harbor was really a surprise, and on and on and on and on. And people are going to go where they think they can find the truth. And all the really expensive, glitzy newsroom sets and hot little babes in tight, clinging clothes are not going to really change that very much at all. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Steve in Massachusetts, are you there? Okay, we seem to be having some difficulty with our phone communications. I'm going to put Steve here back on hold, and hopefully he'll be back when I check in on him in just a little bit. Now, there was another article over in Counterpunch about how George Bush destroyed the Temple of Baal. And the article is talking about all these amazing antiquities and remains of ancient civilization, these monuments that have been destroyed as a result of military action by the United States. Some of it is very obviously deliberate. They literally bulldozed and put a runway over the remains of the city of Ur. And this article is taking it from what a horrible tragedy these accidents happen during war. There's nothing accidental about it. The intentional destruction of ancient monuments in Iraq and elsewhere is a favor by the United States government to Israel. Because Israel justifies its possession of the Palestinian lands with this story about the grand kingdoms of David and Solomon, and there's nothing to back it up. There's a few bits of archaeological flotsam of dubious interpretation and doubtful authenticity and nothing else. But if you go into Egypt, you can't take 3 steps without tripping over proof of their ancient history. Same thing with Iraq, same thing with Syria, all of those lands. In Israel, there is 0 archaeological evidence for this great story of the first temple. In fact, based on the archaeological evidence that does seem to be there, David and Solomon were at best these nomadic tribal chieftains living in tents, and that was it. And so Israel is always having to fight this absence of archaeological information, and the easiest way to do it is to arrange for the archaeological evidence of other ancient civilizations to somehow get destroyed, to level the playing field. I think it's intentional that so many of these antiquities have been destroyed. Now, speaking of destroyed, over in Great Britain, David Cameron is facing a huge firestorm from his tweets he's been posting about recently elected Liberal leader Jeremy Corbyn. And the backlash has been intense because he's out there acting like a spoiled child, throwing a tantrum and trying to scare everybody off. And everybody understands that's what's going on. And the social media has become a driving force in the political discussion in virtually every country. And the established status quo is having a hard time trying to deal with that. I mean, obviously there's fake Twitter accounts and this special software the U.S. has where one propagandist can have 100 IDs, but they're overwhelmed by millions and millions of citizens who know what's going on. All right, we're going to go back here and try and see if Steve in Massachusetts is back on the phone. Steve, you there?
Yes, hi, Mike.
Good, I can hear you this time.
I got a question about the migration. Now, do you think it's a Zionist plan to have America bomb models Mideastern country and have the people flee and assimilate with the people in Europe?
Well, I view this crisis, you know what I've always said about assassinations and wars, there's never just one reason. And I think the U.S. wanted to fan up the refugee crisis to coerce Europe into going along with partitioning up Syria, to create a safe haven in Syria for the Syrians to move back to, and also to control Syria's oil, put it under a U.S. puppet ruler, and leave Assad with this little chip of land over there in Damascus. But there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that from Israel's point of view, all of these people clearing out of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, whatever, makes way for the establishment of Eretz Israel. Remember, just the other day, Israel is demanding, in exchange for the U.S. failure to stop the Iran deal, they want the West Bank and one other area declared to be permanently part of Israel now, rather than occupied territory. Oh, the Golan Heights, that's the other piece they wanted. And so, Israel's expansionist policy is very, very obvious. And you don't even need to look at that. Just look at the map of Israel and Palestine from Israel's founding to today, and you can see who it is that is wiping who off the map. And it's not Palestine wiping Israel off the map. It is, in fact, the other way around, and the maps tell the true story.
Now, Israel is not allowing any of these people being assimilated with their country, right?
Oh, absolutely not, because Israel has to protect its racial purity, but those other countries, you're all mongrelized anyway, so you just take all these refugees. And it is hypocrisy and double standard, and everybody is looking at Israel, which is seen as being part of the cause for the refugee crisis, with this entanglement with the U.S. in Syria. And then they sit back there and say, we're just going to build another wall here. We don't want those people in our country. And at the same time, they're going around and saying, absolutely, you should be taking all these. And then there's this rabbi in Israel who came out with this absolutely lunatic statement that the refugees pouring into Europe will be great because it'll be the end of Christianity and the Messiah will come.
Yeah, and I think it achieves another thing for Israel too. Is a lot of these people are Muslims and they're going into a Christian countries, so and they're not going to change their religion.
No.
So there's going to eventually pit one group upon another.
Well, that's always been something Israel wanted to do, was get all the Christians and all the Muslims to make war on each other and kill each other off, and Israel would sit back in a corner laughing to itself how stupid we all are.
Yeah, and you could see the hype that was built right before it about all the Muslims and how the Muslims are bad, and now we have this situation, so it just seems all too curious.
No, there's a great game in play here, and again, there are multiple overlapping agendas. But at least in terms of the U.S. convincing Europe to support the U.S. agenda in Syria, I see it backflashing tremendously already. And again, we have a lot of magical thinking in the administration. They make these plans and they just sort of guess how it's going to come out without careful analysis. They don't think it all the way through. And they just go from one foreign policy blunder to the next, to the next, to the next.
One more thing, too, that you mentioned about 94 million American people are not working right now.
Yes.
That's people who are able to work.
Yes.
That's excluding children. So if you factor in
no, children, because children younger than 15 are not allowed to work in the United States. I'm talking about working age, younger than retirement, older than childhood. 94 million Americans willing and able to work cannot find a job, have not been able to find a job, and that's the reality of unemployment. And we have to let you go. It's time for our top of the hour news break and commercials. Thank you very much for the call, Steve, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And let's start by taking a phone call. Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just kind of wonder what you thought about that. Came in yesterday, I guess, the 30,000 layoff from HP coming up. You saw that article, right?
Yeah, I did. And it's a reminder that Hewlett-Packard has never recovered from the Carly Fiorina period. As I mentioned last week, I finally had to replace my old HP 28C calculator, and I got a 50G, and I'm very impressed with it. But economically, Hewlett-Packard has never come back. And this is going to be putting a real crimp on Carly tonight at the GOP debate, because she's trying to position herself as this very smart, successful pro-business person, and yet when she had the helm of Hewlett-Packard, she drove it almost to the edge of bankruptcy and was ultimately fired. Now, of course, Carly's going to say, well, that was long ago, and, I'm not connected with that. But very often when you get a bad chief executive at a company, they can cause damage that takes decades to recover from, if you ever recover at all. And I think that's a big part of what's going on with Hewlett-Packard. Now, there was also a story where Hewlett-Packard was attempting a stock buyback, which is something companies tend to do when they're on the verge of releasing a new product, but somehow it stumbled and exacerbated the problem, so now they're having to let all these people go. And something, I think it's symptomatic of a financial culture which sees maneuvering and playing with the stocks and changing all the games as the way to wealth, rather than to focus on creating a good, reliable, dependable product, which is what the original Mr. Hewlett and Packard were all about. And that's what made the company the iconic brand that it used to be. So if Fox News is going to be objective, they should ask Carly about that, but I don't think they will. I think tonight's debate is going to be just like the first one. It's everybody out for Donald Trump's scalp.
Yeah. Hey, that leads me to the next question real quick here, because you're kind of a tech guy. The Windows 10 sounds like a disaster, another disaster, and especially it plays in the hands of the government, the NSA, for spying on more of your belongings, your data. But what is it possible, if you buy a brand new computer, one of these new line computers, to delete that program and add a Windows 7? Can you do that to new computers or not?
I don't think it's possible, because these newer operating systems work with the BIOS, and the BIOS that is supplied will not allow back propagation to older Windows systems, because Microsoft got tired of people buying brand new store-bought computers and throwing off Windows 8 to go back to Windows XP. So I think they put blocks in there. You can still put Linux on the box, or you can do what we do, and that's build a white box of your own. where you can put pretty much anything that you want on it. But this push to get everybody onto Windows 10, the fact that they're pushing that hard, I think should ring alarm bells in everybody's mind, not just because of the government spying, but because of this obvious push to sort of get everybody away from having your own computer, and everything is now merely a terminal into the cloud. They're trying to go back to the model of computing of the 1970s, of giant corporate-owned mainframes, and all the software and the data is there, and your device, whether it's a tablet or a laptop or whatever, is merely a terminal into their system, which is metered as a service. And, of course, we've already seen a lot of disasters where the cloud will lose information, and the cloud will, and it's not secure. There's no way the NSA would allow a secure cloud anywhere. And this absolute war on our personal privacy of our business secrets really does tell us we've gone full on to fascist dictatorship here.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, over in Great Britain again, the fear-mongering regarding Jeremy Corbyn is just going right through the roof. The Tories are already out there saying that if anybody listens to Jeremy Corbyn, there's going to be a Greek-style collapse in Britain, and Britain will be in the same mess that Greece is in right now. Meanwhile, something like 30,000 people have already signed up to join the Labour Party since Corbyn won. It's just absolutely amazing. And the Tories have recruited former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis to basically say, you can't listen to Corbyn. It'll be a disaster. Now, I have to admit the Tories are, to an extent, correct. Great Britain is going to end up like Greece eventually, and so is the entire world. That's what the designers of private central banks intend. For them to own everything and everybody else, slaves to debt. That's the essence of the banking industry, to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, permanently slaved to debt. And the only way Britain or anybody else is going to avoid that outcome is to shut down the private central banks. Andrew Jackson did it. David Cameron wants to admit he's not the leader that an Andrew Jackson was. Fine by me. All righty, we're going to go back to the phones here. We've got John in Barbados. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. Yes, thanks for having me. Well, I'm looking at the political situation all right around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's an earthquake taking place. They've dumped Abbott. It looks like Donald Trump is going to win in America and dump the if you like, the establishment candidates. Jeremy Corbyn, who is, by the way, anti-central bank, he is on the record as saying he will put the Bank of England back under Treasury control.
Well, that shouldn't be too difficult. England was forced to nationalize the Bank of England after the Bretton Woods Conference. Because the Bank of England, without, being the global trade and banking currency, they couldn't make it. So the Bank of England is now actually nationalized. It's one of the few countries where it is.
Well, it was partially nationalized. It still has independent control of interest rates.
Okay, well then I see what you're saying, and I'm in agreement with Corbyn. The public currency of every nation ought to be handled as a public utility, not privatized to make a bunch of money junkies richer than they already are.
Well, I think this New World Order effort seems to be slowly falling apart with all these. I mean, Harper looks to be, Canadian Prime Minister looks to be a loser.
And they just kicked Abbott down in Australia. And you're right. Going into our next year's elections here in the U.S., there's a tremendous anti-incumbent fever sweeping the country. And what's really interesting is this rush to create a single global government underneath a single private central bank has created a political climate leading to a global revolution against those very agendas. And I think that's a good thing. I think Earth and humanity are better served by a world with 1,000 little tiny nations, each taking care of their own and trading with each other in order to avoid the kind of evils we're seeing from these giant imperial powers bestriding the globe like a colossus.
Well, I think that's why Gaddafi lost, because he was creating gold currency, which was very difficult to manipulate for the whole of Africa even.
Yeah, they all wanted to sign on. They wanted to drop the dollar. That's why Gaddafi had to be killed and the gold dinar destroyed. Right now, again, as I told that other caller, because the United States has lost so much of its manufacturing and nobody wants to buy our agricultural produce because of GMO. If the U.S. financial system can't go on, charging interest for global dollars, and the petrodollar deal, the U.S. economy is going to collapse. It's got nothing else to hold it up but that mafia-like piece of the action of all global commerce from countries using the dollar for global trade and banking.
Well, I was looking at an article in, I think it was Investment Watch blog.
Yeah.
And they say that the New York Fed has now refused to repatriate all these nations' gold. And it looks like
they've run out.
Well, some of the gold they repatriated was just gold-plated tungsten.
Yeah, they've just about run out. So has J.P. Morgan and the COMEX. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, John. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm looking at Fox News, and they're already doing the pre-game warm-up before tonight's debate. And I caught this lower third title. How will the GOP candidates deal with Trump? And so already the subtext is there's an adversarial situation between the GOP and Donald Trump. Like he's not real GOP because he's not for sale. And during the first debate, it came out Fox News had literally crafted a plan to deliberately provoke Trump to lose his temper, at which point they had security guards who were going to escort him from the stage on national TV in order to destroy him. And I am hearing rumors they may try that again tonight. And I think the worst mistake Donald Trump has made in his campaign so far was to sign that pledge not to run as third party. And for a guy who's a businessman, I don't know what he thought the upside of that was, but it's all downside. Because now the establishment, the status quo, can uncork on him and kick him out of the race the way they did Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And Trump can't come back third party because they say, see, he doesn't keep his word. And I like Trump because he's stirring the pot. I don't agree with everything that he says. I like the fact that he's an outsider. I like the fact that he's got so much money he's not for sale. But he is, while being a very good businessman, obviously, I see him as dangerously naive in politics. I see him as naive as Jimmy Carter was when Carter came into office, and he got blindsided by a lot of what the establishment did to him, in particular with regard to the Iran rescue mission and the October surprise and the rest of that. All righty, now getting on back to the skullduggery coming from Sodom on the Potomac, article out of Global Research, how Washington now wants to bring about regime change in Ecuador sometime before their elections, which are due in 2017. And I guess what's going on in Washington, D.C. is they're beginning to realize the world is now aware that the U.S. government is building its empire by regime changing other countries, going on in with all these non-governmental organizations like USAID, kicking up trouble, overthrowing the legitimate government and putting in a puppet like they did in Ukraine last year. And rather than back off under public scrutiny, they seem to be like putting all of these plans into operation at once, trying to rush the deal through before it all falls apart. Looking at how well regime change has gone for them so far in Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Libya, I don't think they're going to make it. But unfortunately, they're too far down this dollarification of the world agenda to turn around and go back. They can't say, we were wrong, we're going to go back to status quo ante without the whole thing falling apart. Now, earlier in the week, I think it was Monday, there was an announcement that they were going to try and bring the bill to block the Iran deal back to the Senate floor for another vote. Now, it failed its first vote. And everyone is saying, why are you bringing it back for a second time? And the only thing that seemed to make sense was that in the intervening time, there had been enough senators who were bribed or blackmailed or whatever to change their mind where they thought they could get it through. And apparently the vote happened, and apparently once again the measure failed on the floor of the Senate. Isn't it amazing how hard all these people are working for Israel? And you should remember that, and their names, November of next year. No government can serve two masters. A government that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. They have put that fully on display for everybody to see on the floor of the United States Congress. Right now, we need leaders who will put America first, second, and third. And we've got to get all these, oh, we're a friend of Israel. All right, move there. Let's round up all the friends of Israel, put them in a cargo container, put them on a cargo ship, and send them over there. They love Israel so much, they should move there. We need people in office who are going to be looking at America and what America needs and what Americans need. Not the Israelis, not the Mexicans, not the Nicaraguans, not the Syrian refugees. America first, last, and always. And I realize that kind of a nationalist point of view is contrary to the goal of the New World Order. Tough noogies is all I can say. Now, apparently, as more and more people finally start accepting the fact that the end run by Netanyahu through the U.S. Congress to try and derail the P5+1 is likely to fail, and Israel's already out there demanding weapons and the Golan Heights and the West Bank and all kinds of other things for the failure of the U.S. government to do as they were told by Tel Aviv. Apparently they're falling back on a Plan B being put together by AIPAC, which is going to attempt to find some way to basically constrain the U.S. From carrying out their part of the P5+1 deal. In other words, keep the sanctions in place and put all kinds of loopholes in there where even though the deal is in place and it doesn't matter if Iran is complying or not, the U.S. government will be constrained by congressional action from going through with their part of the agreement. Now, obviously, the result of that in the eyes of world opinion will be the United States cannot be trusted to keep their half of a treaty agreement, or any agreement. And the servants of Israel in the U.S. Congress are apparently okay with that, destroying the moral authority and reputation of the United States of America around the world in order to go on serving their little masters at AIPAC and Tel Aviv. Now, Senator Corker is out there trying to ram through a bill to extend the existing Iran sanctions for another decade and try and get a veto-proof majority for it. And I would like to remind Senator Corker that under the Constitution, international agreements, treaties, are the highest law of the land as long as they don't conflict with the Constitution. And there's nothing in the P5+1 that conflicts with the U.S. Constitution. So Senator Corker is definitely one of those people we need to put on the to-be-voted-out-of-office list next year. Now, Daniel Ellsberg, who you'll probably remember from the Nixon administration, has come on out. First of all, he's supporting Mordecai Vanunu, who's been thrown back in prison by Israel for daring to talk to a reporter. And Ellsberg is out there saying Israel may be sitting on one of the biggest nuclear stockpiles in the world. We know Israel has nuclear weapons. We know they have hydrogen bombs. How many they have has always been kind of up in the air. And Ellsberg is saying his indications are Israel has one of the biggest nuclear arsenals on the entire planet. And yet we're supposed to believe they're helpless little victims of Arab aggression around them, and we've got to give them all of our money and the lives and limbs of our children. I don't think so. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Israel Firsters in the Senate got a second vote to try and get the Senate to block the P5+1 deal. It failed a second time. They're not able to get through there, let alone achieving a veto-proof majority. It is simply not going to happen unless Israel sets off a nuclear bomb somewhere in the U.S. and says, oh, Iran did it. Then they might get it at that point. Everybody's expecting Israel to try some dirty trick like that. But we're seeing the backlash here because all of a sudden all the members of Congress in the House and the Senate are realizing the American voter has been watching this debacle and that it's going to have an influence on next year's election. And everybody's already trying to scramble and get cover and say, oh, no, I was really in favor of the Iran deal. Even Hillary is saying that. even though her prior voting record in the Senate was Warhawk, Warhawk, Warhawk. We are continuing to hear that Boehner may be kicked out of the speakership. They're trying to get him out because of his constant pro-Israel bias. So we're beginning to see a growing backlash across the country and even on Capitol Hill. Now, there's an article over at Desert Peace, how Obama can save Palestine. I fear it is a little bit over-optimistic because they're saying with the whole Iran situation effectively over and done with, that it's time to go back and talk about the two-state solution to deal with Israel and Palestine. And I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Netanyahu will ignore Obama, refuse him, as punishment for not killing the Iran deal as ordered by Netanyahu. Netanyahu's going to throw a tantrum, get down on the ground and kick and scream and cry, "You don't love me." And you're right, we don't when you act like that. Now, Nikolay Mladenov, who is the UN envoy, is warning that the escalating clashes between Israelis and Arabs on the Temple Mount could ignite violence beyond the old city. This could very easily be what Israel wants, to provoke until there's a reaction, and then point at the reaction and say, "Aha, the Palestinians are attacking," and send in the warplanes again. Now, we're seeing another article that came out of Wake Up From Your Slumber, where it has come out that these groups that are continuing to invade Al-Aqsa Mosque and desecrate it, protected by the IDF, their stated goal is they want the Al-Aqsa Mosque to be destroyed because they want the room to build the third temple of Israel, forgetting that they've already had 3 temples. If you believe the story of the first temple, then that was destroyed, then there was the second temple, then there was Herod's temple, which they're saying, well, that was just a remodel. No, it wasn't. It was a complete rebuild. You want to talk about chaos caused by religious fanaticism? It's right there with all these red heifers and all the rest of it and third temples. You want to see religious fanaticism on display in the 21st century? Look at how Israel goes after anybody who doubts the Orthodox story of the Holocaust. Burn the heretic, burn the heretic. Now, Netanyahu is on his way back to the United States of America. He's going to be coming here in early November to meet with U.S. lawmakers to flog them again. My question is, doesn't Netanyahu have his own country to run? Doesn't he have things to take care of in his own country that should keep him from having time to come on over here and muck about with ours? And doesn't our government have more pressing things to do than to daven to a foreign ruler and bow and scrape and kiss his ring and ask for permission to run for high office in this country? It really is humiliating and embarrassing for the American people to see this on display, and I hope they will all remember how humiliated and embarrassed they feel November of 2016, because it's our opportunity to peacefully do a little house cleaning in the people's house. Now then, getting on back down to Yemen, that is still going on. Apparently, the puppet ruler government has now returned to Yemen from Saudi Arabia. They were hiding out for a while. They're back in place, sitting, say we're the government, really, honest, we're the government, and the Yemenite people, of course, or the Yemeni people are saying otherwise. But there's an aspect we all need to remember. The U.S. is supplying the weapons for Saudi Arabia to punish the people of Yemen for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler, including cluster bombs. They're using cluster bombs, which are banned by most countries. Cluster bombs kill civilians. Meanwhile, Australia has made their first airstrike in Syria, trying to get in on the party. I don't know if that's going to last too long with the change of leadership down in Australia. I think maybe this airstrike was sort of arranged ahead of time, and now that Abbott is gone and Trumbull is in, I think we may see Australia kind of pull back from all this global warmongering. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Joey in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I wanted to ask you your take on that Rebecca Roth on those two books she wrote. One was Methodical Illusion, which she claims was a novel. And then because of that effort, she dug deeper and she came out with another one now called Methodical Deception, which really, to me, was a mind blower on the 9/11 events.
Well, I have not read the books here, but just in a nutshell, what is her thesis about, who did 9/11?
The Jews, the Mossad.
Okay, well, I agree with her up to a point. I don't think there's any question Israel was involved. I do not think they did it all on their own. I think they did it in partnership with the United States of America.
Well, I believe that too.
Yeah, because of that thing with the Secret Service and Bush down in Booker Elementary School.
Correct.
That tells us the U.S. government was in on this whole scam.
Right. She has. I saw the two videos off of your page.
I remember posting the page. I remember posting the videos, yes.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that's all. Keep up the good work. I'm behind you.
All right, well, thank you very much for the support here. We're going to let you go. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about how yet another jihadi had been exposed as a phony. I've got a whole page about this fake Al-Qaeda. Somebody even did a YouTube video from the show I did about fake Al-Qaeda. It's out there. Talking about how all these Muslim terrorists that we see in the media turn out to be phonies. Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, the media maven. And it turned out his real name was Adam Perlman. And he's the grandson of a member of the board of the ADL. And we were talking about Yusuf al-Khattab, who ran the Revolution Muslim website that was famous for a picture of a hatchet going into the back of the Statue of Liberty. And that was up in Brooklyn. His real name was Joseph Conan. And the most recent one is this Joshua Goldberg in Florida, 20 years old, still living with his parents. And he was out there on the Internet as Australia Witness. And he's another phony. But what's significant is it has come out. Rita Katz and Site Intelligence Group were promoting this guy as a significant terrorist threat. And that's important to keep in mind because it reminds us that Rita Katz and Site Intelligence Group are as phony as Goldberg is. That's their job, to convince you the Muslims are terrorists and are coming to get you unless you go kill them first. It's all lies and deceptions. The first casualty of war is the truth. It's exactly what's going on. We have to take another break for commercials. When we come back, we'll be talking about the economy after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm getting a confirmation now from a report in Western Journalism Center where CNN is adopting a plan for tonight's debate of trying to literally get the candidates to fight with each other. Now, Fox just wanted to get Donald Trump upset in order to eject him, but we're hearing from Western Journalism Center that the debate moderator, Jake Tapper, who's CNN's chief Washington correspondent, is out there saying, yeah, we're going to try and get him to, shout at each other. Now, whether that's just for ratings or to make certain targeted individuals look bad, but it will be interesting fireworks. Now then, getting on to the economy, Standard & Poor's has downgraded Japan from AA- to A+. The good news is they've changed their long-term outlook for Japan from negative to stable. So they're saying that Japan has hit the bottom of the current cycle and hopefully will start going up again. France is now backing the lifting of sanctions against Russia. This is a continuation of a process we've seen over the last several days where both France and Germany are sort of drifting away from this get Russia agenda of the United States. And they're both signing on to Putin's coalition against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And now France wants to lift the anti-Russian sanctions. They have suffered tremendously, not just with the Mistral ship deal, but with the cutoff of markets for French agricultural goods, which has led to riots in Paris. By the way, Russia has now told France that they can go ahead and sell the Mistral warships with the Russian equipment still installed on it to a selected list of possible customers, rather than go on in and strip out the equipment and reduce the Mistrals to little more than scrap metal. So they're trying to work together to resolve that difficulty. Now, here in the United States of America, you keep hearing we've got 94 million working-age Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for years. And they are not counted by the U.S. Government Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is how they can keep the unemployment level down at that 5.1 joke that they're trying to sell you every single day. We have 46.7 million Americans are living in poverty. Average household income in the United States is back to where it was in 1989. Now, as you know, we have a major homeless problem all across the country, and it's about to get worse between the flood of illegal immigrants and all of these refugees from the countries being bombed by the United States. But we need to take a look at Salt Lake City, Utah, which changed their basic approach to the homeless problem. And rather than just dump the people on the streets and, spend money to police them, keep them controlled, corralled and everything, turned around and started programs to actually get them into housing. And the housing was reasonable, attractive. People actually said, yeah, I'm comfortable living here, as opposed to some of the others that are a little more than shipping crates. Counseling programs to get them off of drugs, get them into work. And as a result, they've got virtually no homeless people any longer. And cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York ought to be looking at this model, because it actually does work. Now, as we mentioned with that caller earlier in the program, Hewlett-Packard just fired another 30,000 of their people. They announced last February they were going to let 58,000 go. And it appears from what we're seeing is Hewlett-Packard let all these people go so they had surplus funds to attempt a stock buyback. But apparently it seems to have stumbled somehow. And the stock price didn't go up as expected, and they're thrashing around right now. And again, this is something that CNN ought to bring up to Carly Fiorina during the debate tonight. She's not a hugely successful business person. She got the CEO position at Hewlett-Packard as much screaming, we need a woman CEO, as anything else. And just like that Navy's female F-14 pilot crashed and burned, almost took the company down. Over in the Eurobanks, they're laying off thousands of people, 33,000 people. That's a warning sign when the banks are letting people go. Meanwhile, the World Bank is warning of serious global financial turbulence if the Federal Reserve raises their base rate tomorrow. Everybody's holding their breath, waiting. What will the Fed do? And Yellen's been talking about, we've only got 5.1% unemployment, and we said when it crossed below 6, we were going to raise the rates. And I'm sure the Federal Reserve understands that number is a complete joke. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if there's a rate increase at all, it will be microscopic, just enough so they can say we raised the rate. Because if there was a significant rate increase, we know what's going to happen because it's happened before. The stock market will tank. Deutsche Bank is saying that if there's an interest rate hike from the Federal Reserve, it could tank stocks by as much as 40%. They may be overstating the situation, but the only thing holding up the American stock market is all this virtually interest-free money pouring out of the Federal Reserve all over Wall Street. They're stuck. They can't stop it. This was supposed to be an emergency, temporary stopgap measure, and now it's become essential. They're addicted to it. They can't stop doing it because there's nothing else holding up the American economy but the printing presses and the computer keyboards. Now, another story that we're getting out of Zero Hedge, Comexodus is what they called it. I think that's very cute. And they're basically saying the gold vaults underneath the New York Federal Reserve and J.P. Morgan have all but run out of deliverable gold. They're saying, J.P. Morgan, one more withdrawal, that's it. It will be empty. And you know what will happen next. The U.S. government will demand that you, the American people, turn over all your gold to help save those poor, struggling banks. And we know this will happen because it happened before, back in 1933. Private ownership of gold was outlawed. You had to turn it in, and you get these little stacks of ink and paper. And as far as I'm concerned, the government can have my wedding ring when they pry it from my cold, dead finger. You're not going to get that. Right now, gold leveraging is 252 to 1. What that means is for every 1 ounce of real deliverable physical gold, there are contracts for 252 ounces. That is an insane amount of leveraging. And the only reason it was allowed to get that much out of control was to keep gold and silver prices down, to discourage people from emptying their stock portfolios and savings account and buying physical, and also to keep gold and silver prices down while the New York Fed and J.P. Morgan scramble to try and buy enough gold to send back to all these European nations that are asking for repatriation. Another article on the same thing, Sputnik News. U.S. gold reserves bottom out as Europe's banks seek financial independence. And Sputnik is saying Europe is trying to break free of influence by the U.S. financial system. And I see it also as a sign that Europe no longer trusts the Federal Reserve or J.P. Morgan or the United States government, which shows you how wise Europe has become in recent months here. PayPal has apparently re-entered the business of online gambling, and they're being very, very quiet about it. And I think they're doing that because a long time ago, PayPal went through this phase where they were shutting off, freezing the PayPal accounts of political blogs, including my own. And the independent media responded by pointing out that PayPal was acting as a payment portal, not only for online gambling, but for porn, and in one case, a child porn website. PayPal had to shut those accounts off, and they suffered some financial harm. Now they're trying to quietly get back into gambling, and they're hoping nobody will notice, but we did. We got to take a break now for our top-of-the-hour news and commercials. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, hand hovering over that telephone, ready to swoop on down. And we have a caller waiting on the line. Keith in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, that correction I sent you, there's actually 2 corrections. That link for arresting Netanyahu was also removed. You have to go search for it. And that U.S. petition.
You're talking the U.S. petition that's already been taken down. Imagine my shock.
Yeah. Anyway, so you have to search for it. I sent you the updated link that I found for it, okay?
Okay.
But anyway, then that Naomi Wolf there, she's Jewish. And the fact is that she's exposed in that video. If you can still find it on YouTube, they keep removing it. But it's called Shock Treatment, and it's about an hour long, but it exposes how the CIA with their MK Ultra thing, how they invaded Chile, all this stuff like that. But she exposes not only the CIA, the neocons, the Wolfowitz gang, all that stuff like that. She's anti-war.
Yeah, no, she's written a lot of really good stuff. And, you know, I think people are laboring under the illusion that all Jewish people support Israel's agenda, and that is absolutely not true. In fact, Israel's been whining and crying that their support among American Jews is very much on the wane. And that's true with a lot of different countries because these people are understanding Israel's actions are actually the biggest threat to their current status, their living, their standard of living, their jobs, their finances, and they're trying to pull away from that.
Right. Yeah, I've emailed extensively with Noam Chomsky there, and he is also, in a way, anti-Israel, to the point that he does not believe what Israel is doing is correct or like that. He doesn't care about the Jewish state as far as, you know, having a Jewish state, but in a real democracy, there'd be a single-state solution with, you know, equal justice for all, not a two-state solution, you know.
Well, the single-state solution, of course, the flaw is that, you know, for its entire history, Israel has been under a racist apartheid state.
Right.
And, you know, there's the Jews and then there's everybody else. And a lot of people don't see. I mean, there are some videos on YouTube about how non-Jews, even Americans visiting Israel for the historical sites who are not Jewish, how they're spit on by the Jews in Israel. I mean, it's really, especially when you get away from the major urban centers where the fanaticism just tends to peak.
Right. I want to add one more thing there, Mike. I'll let you go there.
Okay.
But at the video, the shock treatment there, it explains how under this shock and awe premise, it doesn't matter whether it's Israel doing it or the United States or Ukraine or anything like that. What they do, or England, they go in there and they bomb the hell out of all infrastructure. They cause the power outages, the sewer, water, all that. Just, they destabilize the whole thing, just like Churchill said, to bomb everything, And that's part of their thing. Margaret Thatcher used it. And they used it in Chile there to disrupt the civil war.
It's an old tactic. It's called scorched earth. You just burn everything down, and then the targeted population, they're just totally taken up just with being able to survive from day to day, and therefore they're not going to be an impediment to imperial designs. Right,
and then they'll capitulate to the oncoming government, and that's what they're doing in Yemen right now, scorched earth.
Yes.
So, all right, thanks, Mike. My love to you. All
right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And, of course, what's going on in Yemen is a war crime under international law because it's collective punishment. And collective punishment is a war crime. I hate to be the one to break this to you, but in this New World War, the United States are the bad guys. And 50 years from now, the Stars and Stripes are going to be viewed with as much revulsion as our generation viewed the swastika. I don't want our children to have to grow up with that reality, but it does seem to be that way. Now, getting back to politics and tonight's CNN GOP debate, CNN is hardly objective going on in there. CNN had this headline, Jindal, Trump is a madman who must be stopped. So, and I didn't even bother excerpting any of the story when I posted it to WhatReallyHappened.com. It's just another attack on Donald Trump, and they seem to be very upset with him because he's got so much of his own money, he cannot be bought the way the other politicians get. He's going to just spoil their party. There's another article out here over at the Ostroy Report, the GOP's real problem with Trumpalooza, which I kind of like that word. And basically, it's another attack and saying that, Trump is out there appealing to the party's lowest common denominator, and he's just not what the GOP wants. Well, what's going on here is the American people are sick of what the GOP wants. Same notation for the Democratic Party. We've reached a stage where the leadership of the Democratic parties think that what they want should control the candidate process. And it isn't. The way this country was set up, people form political parties to nominate their candidates. The parties don't exist to tell the people these are who your candidates are going to be. I am seeing a major anti-incumbency fever sweeping this nation next year. And it will be felt in both houses of Congress. To add insult to injury here, there's an article over in Op-Ed News, Dumb and Dumber, an American Political Trademark. Napoleon once said, in politics, stupidity is not a handicap. And to look at American politics recently, he was right. Remember Sarah Palin, Caribou Barbie? These people aren't smart. They're just willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to attain power and wealth. And they go to bed at night thinking that the willingness to lie, cheat, steal, and kill makes them superior human beings. It doesn't. It makes them human beings who are willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill. So let's get on to Hillary's email server scandal, because that is not going away. Now, a while back, somebody asked Hillary, did you wipe your server? And Hillary came up with this glib comment, you mean like with a dust cloth? And everybody thought she was just evading the issue. Now it's coming out that maybe Hillary doesn't really know what that means, because there's a little bit of confusion. Was the server actually wiped in terms of overwriting the disks, or did they simply hit the delete button? Because if they hit the delete button on the emails, those emails are still on the hard disk. And apparently the data center that was housing the server after it was removed from Hillary's home, and the company that set it up in the first place, they're saying they have no record of the hard drives actually being reformatted and overwritten. And so it may be that much of the emails that they thought were deleted were still there. And they're not sure. They're trying to get a clarification. Meanwhile, over at the FBI, which has the server, not a word coming out. Now, over at MSNBC, they had a pro-Hillary guest, David Brooke from Media Matters, came on in and say, you know, nothing was done wrong, no crime, no laws were broken. And Joe Scarborough basically said, look, you're in a corner all by yourself. And Brock came back by saying the Department of Justice had filed a legal paper claiming that Clinton's email deletions were proper. Well, that's not exactly what they said. The Department of Justice said that Hillary's deletion of her personal emails was legal, and yes, it is. But the Department of Justice doesn't know what was deleted. We're just supposed to take Hillary's word for it. But now we know that there are these huge time gaps in the emails Hillary turned over to Congress and Judicial Watch. One of them longer than a month. That's come out. Nobody's going to believe that Hillary Clinton was not conducting official business for as long as an entire month. So she deleted official emails, and that's a felony. And then she's open for a charge of perjury. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are loaded up, but I want to get through a couple of stories before we start taking phone calls here. Story coming out of Investors.com. Hillary knew her emails were being hacked, yet continued using the unsecured server. Now, there's a new wrinkle that has come out from all of this, because Hillary was originally saying that the emails arrived at her private server unclassified. Security experts, intelligence experts have now come out and confirmed that much of what Hillary Clinton was receiving was classified at the moment of creation and should have carried classification marks. Now, in the government's email system, email that is tagged with these classification marks cannot be forwarded. The emails turned over by Hillary that contain classified information do not have those marks on them. Whoever took those marks off is guilty of a felony. And what we're realizing now with those huge gaps in the email, there's a lot of stuff that was official emails that has been deleted. These few bits of classified information they found so far are the ones that Hillary's people missed when they were trying to clean the server, clean the emails. Judge Napolitano is out there saying that one of the gaps in the timeline is almost 2 months long and is right after what the Benghazi consulate attack. And one more time, I'm seeing out on the web, more and more bloggers, more and more independent media are starting to ask the question I've been asking. Is the combination of a weak, unencrypted, private email server carrying classified information outside monitoring and control by the U.S. government, coupled with a charitable foundation, indications of an espionage operation, a repeat of the 1996 Chinagate scandal? And if so, it would be the biggest spy scandal in U.S. history. All right, let's take a few phone calls here. We're going to talk with Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
Hello.
As far as the washing of the server goes, I mean, if she was just deleting, first of all, she knows what she's talking about. She has all these people. I've been using this program called File Scavenger, since like 2001. I don't know whether you've ever heard of it or not, but
I've heard of similar.
It works on. Yeah, it works on flash drives, like for cameras, you hook your camera into USB. I mean, I've been using this for years. It works on bad master boot records. Anyway, I don't believe for a second that she doesn't know what she's talking about. But as far as Americans go, and of course you're one of them, once in a while I get the rare opportunity to come in contact with somebody that is supposed to be bright because they're an OEM for a piece of machinery and that. Like I'm a millwright, so last week I ran into one of these fellas, and we started chatting and that, blah blah blah. And he said something about, you're the leader of your country is really weak. And I went, what? What do you mean weak? And he went on to describe, all the money that the United States spends on their militarism and all that. And I said, well, how does it feel to live in a country that terrorizes the rest of the world? And he said, great. He said, I think we should do more. I said, you're kidding, right? You're obviously being facetious. He said, no, I'm serious. Barack Obama is a pussy. And I went, wow. Said, you have no idea.
Yeah, there are people. There are people who are like that. Unfortunately, I have some in my extended family here whose attitude is, let's steal all the oil. To heck with the rest of them. And these are people who've never actually been in combat, and they're just personally selfish. And they think that's just the way things are supposed to be. But they are a rapidly dwindling minority. And at this point, what I'm seeing in the emails that are coming in, especially after doing Coast to Coast Monday, Americans really have started to wake up. And more than that, they're starting to develop the courage to stand up to other Americans who are out there saying, let's just, kill them all, let God sort them out. You also need to understand that a lot of people in the United States of America are compromised. They're undercover informants. They're grassroots lobbyists. They are constrained by their own political, financial obligations to adopt certain points of view and to promote them. And once you realize that kind of a clandestine infiltration, if you will, public relations is going on, it becomes very obvious who's out there talking about how they really believe and who is out there simply spouting the talking points they were sent that morning. Al, you there? I seem to have lost Al here. All right, we're going to switch over to Anthony in California. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. Hi. I just wanted to say that, or ask you, what's your thoughts about Jimmy Carter and his statement he made publicly declaring that America's an oligarchy, bribing politicians and controlling them, which is the same thing as saying it's no longer a democracy.
I'm absolutely in agreement. We're not a capitalist nation. We've descended into full economic fascism, which is another polite word for oligarchy, where those few individuals that have the vast amount of money are using that money to consolidate more wealth and more power. Carter is absolutely 100% correct.
Well, I just want to say, after he made that statement, he got advanced cancer. He's stricken with cancer right now.
Yeah, I know, and we wish him the best. But he had cancer before, and he went through the orthodox treatment, which we know may make the cancer go away temporarily, but it can come back much worse than it was before. So I'm not sure that the two are linked. I mean, there's an article that a member put up on WhatReallyHappened.com about how 5 South American leaders who criticized the United States all came down with cancer pretty much at the same time. And I got to admit, that does seem like defying statistical odds for that. But, Carter was absolutely right about America becoming an oligarchy. He was absolutely right in his book, Peace, Not Apartheid. And, the money junkies who've got the wealth, they think that's the way the world is supposed to be, and they're willing to spend a little tiny bit of their fortune to hang on to the rest of it. And there are way too many people who are willing to take that little bit of money to help protect the wealth and power of the oligarchs. That's sort of the problem of oligarchy. But if you think about it, ultimately, to some degree, every government on earth, to some extent, is an oligarchy, where the wealthy are buying influence to accelerate their acquisition of wealth and to protect their businesses. The reason the U.S. tax code is such a nightmare is of all the special favors being bought by the oligarchs for their particular business. We got to take a break for commercials, Anthony. Thank you very much, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go ahead and take one more phone call, and then we're going to shut the phone lines down because I got a bunch of stuff I got to cover before the end of the program. Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Back to Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
I heard this, and I didn't believe it, so I went and looked for myself. But sure enough, it was there. The Jerusalem Post had an article. This was not in the editorial section, but the headline read, Jimmy Carter's cancer is God's punishment for the way he treated the Jewish people.
Yeah, I saw that headline. I thought it was very, very tacky. You know, for them to be, first of all, to be like celebrating a very painful, lingering death for anybody, but then, you know, look what they're doing to the people of Gaza.
Yeah, unbelievable. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the program. I got a bunch of stuff I need to get through. Now, Hillary Clinton is trying to move away from the email server scandal, especially as more and more independent media are starting to suspect that she was spying, selling U.S. secrets on her private server in exchange for donations to her so-called charitable foundation. She's trying to move away, and she's basically going back and trying to court the women's vote because that has started eroding away from her. And Hillary came out with this latest ad of sympathy for the survivors of sexual assault. You have a right to be heard. You have a right to be believed. And, of course, it's drawn immediate condemnation from a lot of people, including victims of Bill Clinton's sexual assault, such as Kathleen Willey, who was assaulted by Bill Clinton in the Oval Office on the very same day her husband, Ed Willey, met with a very suspicious death. And the hypocrisy here is galling. You, if you're a victim of sexual assault, you have a right to be heard and be believed, unless you're accusing my husband, and then you're just cheap trailer trash sluts who shouldn't be listened to by any decent human beings. And it's almost insulting that she thought she could get away with that. And over at National Review, they have an article saying that for her to put this out there, with Bill Clinton's record and Hillary's record of leading the charge to smear and discredit Bill Clinton's sexual assault victims, proves that Hillary thinks you are all stupid morons with no memories, that you can't remember past last week, and that she can get away with this. I mean, this is a whole new level for audacity. And it's just amazing. And I have to wonder, you know, has Hillary surrounded herself with a bunch of yes men and yes women who just go along with any lame brain idea? Is there nobody in Hillary's campaign office saying, look, this is kind of a dumb thing for you to try? I'm starting to think that maybe there was something to all those rumors that Hillary did suffer a head injury and she's not thinking clearly. And something else Hillary is hoping you'll forget, and that's her voting record when she was in the Congress. Because she's out there today saying she supports the Iran deal with Obama. But when she was in the Congress and as Secretary of State, she was eager to push the button on everybody. Remember Libya? We came, we saw, he died, and then she giggles. And everybody's admitting Libya was an epic mistake, except for the people who wanted to get rid of the gold dinar and guarantee Libya's oil sold for the U.S. dollar, in which case, from their point of view, it's a success. But Hillary was one of the most trigger-happy secretaries of state in the nation's history. Now, do you remember James O'Keefe went out with a video camera, and in Nevada, he caught a Hillary Clinton campaign staffer, Christina Gupana, violating Nevada election law. First of all, by telling people engaged in a voter registration drive only to register the ones who said they were going to vote for Hillary. And also, Nevada requires volunteers who are collecting voter registrations to have a state license issued by the county clerk. And apparently on this video, Gupana seems to know that none of the volunteers they have brought in to register Hillary voters only had that required license. So there's two violations right there. Now, Nevada election officials have launched an investigation into the Hillary Clinton campaign about these violations, and all of a sudden Christina Gupana can't be found. She's gone away. Nobody knows where she is. Maybe they should be looking in Fort Marcy Park. Between Gupana taking a powder and Brian, the guy who set up her server, taking the fifth. Yeah, she's got lots and lots to hide. Now, over at the New York Times, no less, they're owning up to the reality that Hillary is in serious, serious trouble. Her favorability ratings are headed down. They're going into the Al-Qaeda. Her numbers are worse than they were in 2007 or 2008. In fact, right now, her favorability ratings are at an all-time low for her entire political career. She's in trouble. Bernie Sanders is gaining on her. Biden is still trying to decide if he's going to step in or not. I know all the people were out there saying, oh, Trump is going to get into the nomination, then he's just going to hand it to Hillary. Well, at the rate we're going right now, Hillary's not even going to get the nomination. And I think that's the best way to make sure Hillary does not become the president, is to make sure she does not become the nominee. Now, over at the Washington Free Beacon, Heilemann is roasting Hillary and saying that many of the mistakes that she is making right now are repeats of the mistakes she made in her 2007 campaign. It's like she couldn't learn from her past mistakes, or her staff couldn't learn from the past mistakes. It's just a repeating pattern, which is good news because she didn't do all that well in her 2008 campaign here. Now, Jeb Bush was interviewed recently, and he made this bizarre comment that upset a lot of people, that Jeb Bush doesn't see a national right to gun ownership and said the states are free to pass whatever gun laws they want. And it basically reminded everybody that Jeb Bush hasn't really read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And apparently the Bush campaign felt obligated to contact the Daily Caller, where the statement had appeared, to explain that, well, actually, Bush understands there's a Second Amendment, and the states have to comply with that, and they're basically doing damage control. Now, Jeb Bush's supporters have tried to bash Donald Trump and his comments about how the decline of America, with this new video, America's great already, and there's all these beautiful video images of how great America is. And then it turned out they were using stock footage that had been filmed in Britain and Asia. It's not even the United States that is in this video to tell you how great the United States happens to be. This was discovered by Politico. And, you know something, if Jeb can't manage his own supporters to use videos of America in a video about America, it shows a serious lack of management skill, in my opinion. Same thing with Hillary, not being able to get her campaign staff in Nevada to comply with the law. If she can't get her own campaign to comply with the law, then she, by default, is not suited and qualified for the job of President of the United States of America. Another story coming over from Riff.com. Jeb Bush's performance so far has been so poor since that first GOP debate. A lot of his fundraisers and supporters are starting to step back and say his campaign may be over already, like Rick Perry's. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is out there putting his... Well, we got to take a break for commercials here, and we'll be back with the final segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. Now, Joe Biden is out there. We got a video. It's linked to WhatReallyHappened.com, where he's out there saying, I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. Well, Joe, in my opinion, you should be an American to be president. And I think this next year, we're finally going to see Americans wake up and realize no government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. And in these dark times, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. Now, Netanyahu may have hoisted with his own petard, with this spectacle of the speech before Congress and literally going all out to prove to the world that he and not the American people are in charge of Congress. And the American people need to be reminded as we get into October of next year, just a little over a year from now, remind the American people that Congress is supposed to be working for we the people. That's our house, the people's house. It's not the property of a foreign government. Meanwhile, Ted, I was born in Canada, Cruz, has a new ad out using a scorpion to depict the threat of Islamic terror. There's a scorpion in the desert. They're coming to get you, unless you vote for Ted Cruz. And basically, it's a ripoff of Reagan's 1984 ad. There's a bear in the woods that he used to illustrate the evil empire of the Soviet Union. And it was a very effective ad. But of course, Reagan was pushing a foreign policy of peace through strength and did launch this amazing military buildup, including Star Wars, which was an absolute very costly disaster. They didn't really get anything useful out of it. But of course, our current politicians, they want confrontation. We want to go to war and we want to bomb people. And so Ted is out there, pandering to the war parties, pandering to Israel, and basically stealing Reagan's concepts for his ads here. We're getting word now from the Times of Israel. Iceland has now declared a boycott of all Israeli goods, standing in solidarity with Palestine. And of course, that prompted Israel's foreign ministry to call Reykjavik a volcano of hatred, showing that Israel, as always, is just brilliantly gifted at exaggeration and hype. Now, we're going to start in on the refugee crisis. Obviously, we're running out of time today, so we're going to have to take a lot of this into tomorrow. But the refugee crisis is beginning to show deep divisions emerge in the European Union. The borders are all now being closed. There are arguments over who is supposed to take what. This could actually tear the European Union apart even ahead of the economic crisis. And it is a serious, serious problem. Hungary has begun mass arrests of refugees trying to break through the fence. They're using tear gas at the border crossings. Serbia has formally complained about the use of tear gas. And I'll bet, after all of this, Europe isn't going to have such a casual attitude toward U.S. wars of conquest in the Middle East from now on. If this refugee crisis was being fanned up to get Europe to go along with a U.S. plan to partition Syria and have the part with the oil under a U.S. puppet government as a safe haven for the Syrian people, and Assad can keep Damascus and that little bit by the ocean, it has backfired. Because all of a sudden, the people of Europe, those people in Europe who are in denial about how serious the situation is, how close we are to a true world war, they're now looking at it. The face of America's aggression is now lined up on their streets, on their borders. And I think it's backfiring, and we're starting to see it. France is pulling away from the U.S. agenda. Germany's pulling away from the U.S. agenda. Apparently, over in Malta, a Libyan immigrant just went on a random stabbing spree, screaming Allah Akbar. Maybe the guy was on prescription antidepressants, or maybe it's a staged incident by people who are a little bit alarmed by this insistence by the corporate media that we just have to take in all these refugees, really. Just blend them all in, so we're going to just be one common clot of humanity all over the planet where there's no sense of national identity or regional or cultural identity. It's just a bunch of people who will be ready to accept a global government and a global private central bank. Now, apparently Latvia is dragging their heels over letting refugees into their country, and they've been issued a warning that they may actually be kicked out of the European Union for refusing to accept refugees. Remember, Brussels already came out and said that any European Union nation that doesn't accept refugees, they're going to be punished, they're going to be penalized, they could be kicked out. This could tear the EU apart. And the European Union, like the North American Union, were considered stepping stones toward that single global government. It's all coming apart. And in those areas where the refugees have come and gone, there is a huge mess remaining. Garbage and various other things that large moving groups of homeless people tend to leave behind them, and that's creating a huge amount of anger. Now, Obama has announced that they're going to admit 100,000 refugees into the United States of America. Gee, I wonder what they're going to do. Well, Senator Chris Murphy is out there saying, well, we'll just put them on welfare. That's it. We're just going to be putting them on welfare. And that's got to be angering to a lot of U.S. citizens who are not getting a good deal from the U.S. government, including our homeless military veterans. The U.S. government is going to bring these refugees into this country and give them money to live on. And we have somewhere between 130,000 and 200,000 military veterans who served in these wars of conquest who are now homeless on the streets of America, and the U.S. government couldn't be bothered, can't waste time on them. I find that insulting. I am opposed to the wars, but I think our returning military veterans, we do owe them a certain degree of consideration and care for those who have been traumatized and damaged and crippled by these wars. And we have a government that is treating illegal immigrants from the Mexican border and refugees coming from Syria better than it treats the legal citizens, better than it treats its own serving soldiers. What's wrong with these people? And finally, over in Oklahoma, they're getting ready to execute a prisoner, Richard Glossip. It's supposed to happen, I guess, sometime very, very soon. And apparently, this is another case where it's less than certain that he really committed the crime, that he's going to be put to death for. There's no physical evidence that ties him to the murder. There was no motive he had that makes any sense at all. The detectives in the case engaged in tactics that increased the probability the witnesses were providing false information. And we have all these people are calling for the Oklahoma governor, Mary Fallin, to grant a stay of execution while this gets looked at. And if she refuses to do so, because after all, the government is infallible, and if the Supreme Court refuses to step in, this guy's going to be executed. And all jokes about tarring and feathering computer hackers aside, I am opposed to a death penalty because our system makes mistakes. Our justice system is not just. It favors the wealthy and the powerful. And by the way, if you missed it, John Oliver did an expose on the public defender scandal in this country, where these public defenders, they get 7 minutes to work on each case, and they basically say, plea it out, plea it out, plea it out, plead guilty, go away. And until we can restore life to those it is taken from wrongfully, we should not take it in the first place. And I hope somebody puts a stop to this. Because looking at this case, I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt this guy deserves to die. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the afternoon. We will be back tomorrow with more news and other information. Thanks to everybody who is calling their local talk radio stations. We're getting calls from them. Thanks to everybody who wrote into Coast to Coast asking for them to bring me back. I understand they got quite a bit of email on that. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.